So if these predictions are correct, what does it mean for life on Earth? So here, once again from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, is their take-home message about what business as usual would mean by the year 2100 AD. So, in addition to the world being warmer, you expect the hydrological cycle to become more active, which basically means extreme weather events, both high rainfall like floods or cyclones, and low rainfall like droughts and bushfires, will become more common. Of course, we have extreme weather now and always have, but you expect extreme events to be 3 to 5 times more common by 2100 if you're talking about a 2 to 3 degree warming by then, which is a kind of a business as usual conservative estimate. So when you might have had a nasty flood every 50 years, you might get the same flood every 10 years. Same for cyclones, bushfire weather and so on. Heat stress, as it's a few degrees hotter and that affects some parts of the world much worse than others, we expect that there'll be parts of India, Africa and Central and Southern America where it'll be basically too hot to work outside for up to 250 days a year. And that's going to have a huge effect on people will just have to sit inside air conditioning. It'll be just too hot to be out for much of the day without doing serious death, risk of dying. There'll be increasing food and water insecurity, mostly in poor countries, partly because of these extra floods and droughts and fires. Coastal flooding and sea level rise, mostly that happens after the year 2100. For example, the warming that's already happened, it may well be enough to cause several of the ice sheets to melt, but that will take hundreds of years. So we might be looking at many meters of sea level rise, but that might be for 2300, 2400, and it's kind of already locked in. I mean, unless we do something very drastically, that will happen in the future, even if we decide to stop all global warming in the future. It's already too late, possibly, for some of these ocean areas. But we're talking maybe about a metre of sea level rise by the end of the century, which is going to be a problem for many low-lying areas. Economic projections, I'm not sure I believe any of these, but the World Economic Forum are saying about a 12% contraction in the world economy over what it would otherwise have been by 2050, which is not huge. Given that the economy is growing by many percent, that means we're foregoing maybe a decade's growth. It's still a bigger economic effect than it would cost to actually do something about it, so they're saying just do it, it's cheaper. The reason why it's not a major effect is that people can adjust. For example, the Great Barrier Reef will probably be destroyed, which will take out a large part of the tourism industry, but those people will go and work on something else, maybe installing solar panels. So in terms of economy, you can't put a number to it, but it's maybe not quite as bad as you're thinking. I don't want to lose the barrier reef, let me be clear about that. Also, a lot of the damage has happened in poor countries, and if you're just adding up gross national product, destroying the livelihood of a farmer who earns $100 a month is a relatively small effect to the economy. So I'm not sure that economic contraction is a very morally sound thing to be talking about, but that's the number that some people like to hear. Here are some more detailed figures explaining what's going to happen, and again you can look at the IPCC reports. So we're talking about the different temperature rises up here and how serious the damage is. So very high risk, high, moderate or undetectable. And where we are at the moment, you can see we're getting either moderate or undetectable damages for most things. By the time you're up at 1.5 degrees, it's somewhat worse. By the time you're at 4 or 5 degrees, it's bad for almost everything. So the worst thing down here is this thing here. You see we're already at the high and we'll soon get to the terminal, and this is warm water corals like the Great Barrier Reef. So at 2 degrees we're talking about a 99% reduction in coral reefs, and we're getting pretty close to that already. Whereas other things like salt marshes, you need to be getting 4 or 5 degrees before you're talking very major damage to them. There'll be some damage at 2 or 3 degrees. You can see extreme weather events and unique and threatened systems are pretty badly damaged. Biodiversity loss and permafrost degradation, here's wildfire, and so on. You can look through these yourselves. So you can try and estimate all the different Earth systems, how bad the effects are going to be, and it all gets worse as the temperature goes higher and higher, and some things are damaged much faster than others. Here's the global mean sea level rise. Now, the Intergovernmental Panel was not assuming that the ice sheets don't collapse, and that may be rash. We don't know they're going to collapse, but there is a chance, in which case sea level rises could be way higher. But you can see we're talking about half a metre to a metre by the end of the century, and that'll be quite bad for urban areas and atoll islands, less bad in rich countries where they can afford to build big walls. If, on the other hand, the ice sheets collapse, then it'll be very much worse. And here we're talking about how many people are going to die just because it becomes too damn hot that you can't go out without air conditioning. And again, this depends on adaptation. So if you don't adapt very much, it's going to be very bad at 3 or 4 degrees, but if you plant trees to cool cities down and build air conditioning all over the place, then it may not be so bad. Similarly, for food insecurity, if we just leave things as it are, it gets pretty bad at 2 or 3 degrees, but if you start planting new crops, moving farms to different regions and things like that, it may not be so bad. Now, a warning, none of these estimates include tipping points, which we'll talk about later. This is the idea that the climate will flip into a new state at some threshold, and this is entirely possible. We know that if things get a little bit colder, the climate flips into a new system and triggers ice ages. We don't know what happens if we get a little bit warmer, but it's quite possible that something will flip, and we'll talk about that later, in which case all these estimates could be drastic understatements and we could be looking at a totally different climate system. Bear in mind that for ice ages, a very small change in the amount of sun hitting particular latitudes was able to produce a massive drastic change with ice sheets covering half of Europe. It could be there's something similar going the other way if you make things a little bit warmer. But anyway, that's our current best understanding of global warming and what it will do.